So hi again, folks. Here's your Cyril sitting. Just finished talking from my other video I just did, which you're going to probably see online. Um, so I'm about to do this other video, and this video might be a little bit longer. And of course, I guess you guys know that my videos tend to be lengthy, and hopefully they're lengthy, but they're interesting. Not hopefully they're lengthy, but even though they're lengthy, hopefully they're interesting to you. Well, this other video I'm going to talk about right now is another thing that is not spoken of much in the Caribbean. I guess it's getting a lot of attention nowadays, and it's being spoken about, but I just do not think it has taken on the momentum it needs to take on to be tackled. And it's not just one topic. Actually, it's three topics round up in one, but two of them I'm going to speak about right now, or I'm going to mention. That is domestic abuse in the Caribbean, and third, child abuse in the Caribbean. Now, one of the things about us as Caribbean people, again, I am from the island of St. Thomas in the Caribbean. I was raised on the island of St. Kitts in the Caribbean. That's where my father is from. My mother is from the island of Nevis, which is right next door to St. Kitts, which is also in the Caribbean, obviously, Nevis. My ex-wife is from the island of Jamaica, that everybody knows about. And my current wife is from the country of Guyana, which associates itself with or which is associated with the Caribbean island chain, especially the former British islands. Well, the reason why I'm bringing this up, it's because it's something that bothers me. And I guess a lot of people will probably decide to look at a video on domestic violence and see the face of a woman talking about it because they've gone through it. Now, I will admit, I'm doing this video, and not so much because of my own personal experience. Yes, I did go through my share of domestic violence and so forth, from the hands of a woman, mind you. But it's not about me, and that was something I could pretty much handle. I wasn't bruised and battered like a lot of women, or whatever. I was able to handle myself, but it was still attempted abuse at least, okay? But I'm not going to talk about me because it's more something that affects women. And this is something that has been going on from since I was a child. And it's so crazy to show you that when I was growing up, I thought this was just a normal part of our society, or that's just how things went, I should say. And it happens so often that, yes, it does come over like it seems like it's a normal thing that goes on in our societies in the Caribbean. My first exposure to domestic violence happened to involve an uncle of mine, and he had a child with a woman, and apparently they had an issue about it. This is when I was growing up on the island of St. Kitts, and I guess they had an issue about it. And I remember, I think I was about 6 or 7 years old. I remember the woman coming down to our family house, and I guess she had an issue with my uncle at the time, and they got into an argument. And I remember I was standing there peeping from behind my grandmother at the doorway. And they took it out to the streets, and because the whole neighborhood was now looking, and I guess my uncle felt embarrassed or insulted or disrespected. And I guess he went on the street following behind her. And I just remember someone coming down the road and telling my grandmother to head up the street because there was a fight breaking out between my uncle and this woman. And I just remember going up there, and I vaguely can remember, but they got into a heated exchange, and I believe the woman cut my uncle with a razor somewhere around his stomach area, and he in turn turned around and picked her up and body slammed her. I do remember that. After that happened, there was I don't remember what even happened. I think I remember my grandmother going in and breaking up the fight. But there was no police report. There was no police called. There was nothing that went on. It just became a conversation in the neighborhood. That was the end of that. When I moved to the island of St. Thomas, where I was actually born, I remember women getting beating up in the neighborhood. And you would hear, like in the stillness of the night, you would hear arguments breaking out. And you would hear the fights going on. And there was no calling the police. People just mind their own business. They heard what was going on. You heard it whispered around the neighborhood, but no one really did anything about it. You just felt like it was just That's how people handle their differences. That's how couples handle their differences. You know, if the woman stepped out of line, it was up to the man to smack her around for stepping out of line. And if the man was out there doing stuff that he was not supposed to do, it was okay for the woman to hit him upside with a frying pan because he's doing something he shouldn't do. And this was just basically how it came over. Now that I've gotten much older and I look back in hindsight, I realize that all those things were wrong. And I'm not saying that improvements have not been made in regard to these type of things. Nowadays, when things like this happen, police will show up at your door and try to take reports and see what is basically going on. But what I'm seeing more of now, I shouldn't say more of, it's always been going on, but I guess what I've been paying attention to cause me to do this video is the fact that now we live in a world where we have social media. I can pick up my phone, I can pick up my computer, I can tap into any news anywhere in the world. But because I am so fascinated by Guyana right now, because I've been there 7 times so far, and that's where my wife is from, so I pay attention to what's going on in a place like Guyana. I pay attention to what's going on in a place like Trinidad. Of course, I pay attention to what's going on back home. Of course, Jamaica is still a big part of my scope into what I look into. And I do browse Caribbean news agencies and look to see what their online stories are talking about. And because I have friends who are from all over the Caribbean, they put up things that come across their news feed from, I guess, whatever islands they come from. Almost without fail, almost every day, I see some story of some man killing a woman somewhere in the Caribbean. As a matter of fact, just before I did this video, I forgot what country it was. I think it was Guyana again. Some man killed his girlfriend or his wife or something along that line. And this is almost like a daily occurrence. Women dying at the hands of men in the Caribbean. I don't exactly know what it is. I can speculate and give my layman's opinion as to what could be causing this, but it just seems like it has always been a thing that is there. Now, one of my theories is this, which leads into the other thing about child abuse. People have to keep in mind, and this is not an excuse, mind you, but perhaps a reason, perhaps an underlying reason. People have to understand that the Caribbean, the current Caribbean that we have right now, this is, when I say the current Caribbean, I'm talking about since the time that Africans were brought in, enslaved Africans were brought in to serve these white masters, so to speak. Let's go from that time forward. Just remember that society was fashioned, was shaped in violence, it was shaped in intimidation, it was shaped in oppression, and it was shaped in hierarchy. And the reason why I'm saying this, it's because you cannot go and enslave people for 300-400 years, beat into them obedience, crush them, take away their humanity, remove it from them, and as again, just beat them and intimidate them and instill fear into them to follow what you want them to do. Completely remove their humanity or treat them as equals. And not believe that 400 years of that is not going to leave a long-lasting legacy on that community upon which all these things were inflicted. So what do we have today? In the Caribbean, we still have that violence. And this is the thing that really bothers me, and maybe a lot of people don't think about this. When it comes to the Caribbean, a lot of times we look around and we pride ourselves in the fact that we have morals. We're not like those African Americans who just sit around and do nothing all day. That type of thinking is what we have. We have ethics, and we're disciplined. You know, we grew up with strong discipline in our homes. So I don't go out there and rob a freight train. I go to school. I do what I have to do. I'm successful. And we point to discipline all the time, and you hear this thing. So, of course, I know I'm bleeding over into my other part of the subject, which is child abuse. But we love to say, oh, when I was growing up, my grandmother used to beat me with a broomstick or whatever caught her hand, and look at how I turned out. And we look at that and we say, see, I don't rob people. I have respect for others. I have respect for my elders. I would never dare do the things I see these kids doing nowadays because I grew up under strong discipline. My grandmother didn't play that. My mama didn't play that. My father would hit me upside my head with something if I did so and so. He would come to school and haul me up by my collar and beat me in front of everybody. And we somehow say that with somewhat of a badge of honor. And I've always said that we may turn around and say, see, I turned out okay. And I always say this, look a little closer, and tell me if you've turned out okay. Now, I'm not saying this is for everyone. There's some people who got brooms broken over their heads and went through all sorts of nonsense, and I guess this might not apply to them. Doesn't mean that they grow up to be abusive. But for a lot of people, if you had to look at what transpired, I want to say there's a correlation between what they went through growing up as children in the Caribbean, in households where discipline was strong, and a correlation between how they have relationships with other people, with their lovers, with their boyfriends, with their girlfriends, with their husbands, with their wives, even with their children. So a lot of us, because of this long legacy of feeling that we have to grab that whip and beat obedience into you, just like the slave masters used to do, that we have to break you down like you're a wild bronco, and I've got to break you down to my will, remove your will to impart my will onto you. And we feel we have to go that route, and we have to stick that into you. So not surprisingly, when some of us have grown up and become adults, we feel the same exact way when it comes to our own children. And we feel the same exact way when it comes to our other half, our spouses or whatever. Because remember, when you wanted an enslaved person back in the days of slavery to comply to your will, you intimidated them. You put fear into them. You punished them. And you did it in front of other people, or in front of other enslaved people, to make sure they got no bright ideas to try you. I want to say that legacy was passed on into our society, and we still have it to this very day. Now, of course, there are other factors, which I can't really get into all of them right now, because all around the world, women have been treated like trash since the beginning of time. As patriarchy has come in to basically say, I am a man, I have the strength, so I should be the dominant one, and I should dominate you and do what I want to do to you and impose my will upon you. But right now, I'm speaking about the Caribbean. The other things that I just realize is that so many of us grow up to just be cold, stiff upper lip, affection is out the door, we don't do that stuff around here. So I know when people jokingly say, oh, I guess you never got enough hugs when you were a kid, that's why you turned out the way that you are. There's some truth to that. There's no warmth to a lot of individuals in the Caribbean. They don't know what it is like to show love, because showing love, showing affection is seen as a sign of weakness. And then, of course, our Caribbean area, our region, is also heavily, always one of the legacies that also came through slavery was the indoctrination or the introduction into Christianity. And there are parts of Christianity for years that is still prevalent today that believes a woman is beneath a man and she needs to know her place, or that she's to be blamed for all of the things that is going on in the world, or that old-fashioned belief that women are sneaking, they're conniving, you've got to watch them. You got to keep an eye on them because they're up to no good. Now, of course, a part of our Caribbean community also, you have to remember, they came from other parts of the world where there was a system in place that basically say women were at the lower rung of the system. And again, that's also another part of the legacy that was handed down. You own your woman. So if she's not doing right by you, or she disrespects you, or she dishonors you out there on the streets because she's messing around with somebody else, or you suspect she's doing that, then it's almost like your duty to go ahead and kill this woman, or to harm her, or to maim her. So it's not surprising when you go to the Caribbean, you look at certain communities and realize it seems like it happens more in that community because of this whole thing about dishonoring. You know, like how you have honor killings in certain parts of this world, where if your daughter gets up and she's sleeping on with some other guy, or she gets pregnant, it's like the family's duty to go ahead and kill her to end the dishonor to the family. Well, we may not get that ridiculous in the Caribbean about stuff like that, but there is a lingering legacy of that same thinking. Oh, I heard my woman was cheating on me, so I'm going to go home and chop her up with a cutlass. Oh, I caught her doing this, so I'm going to go and do so-and-so to her. And in some cases, it's also the other way around, where the women, probably not feeling to have the power to do something like that, where they turn around and go kill themselves because they felt like their husband or their boyfriend dishonored them. These are some serious things in the Caribbean, which, if you believe it or not, drives the high suicide rate in a place like Guyana, which I don't know where they are right now, but I knew a few years ago, per capita, they led the world in suicides. There's a problem there. And when you go throughout the Caribbean, if I'm not mistaken, St. Vincent and the Grenadines a few years back, I don't know if it was in the world, but I think it was in the Caribbean, led the Caribbean in domestic violence incidents. And domestic violence doesn't always end with a woman just getting beat up and battered. A lot of times, too many times, it ends in death. This is a big problem that we have going on in the Caribbean that I think is not spoken about much. Not only is it not spoken about much, I went to YouTube to try to see if I can find some documentaries on this. There are videos, but not as much as I thought would be there. Number two, I was looking at the views, and there's a couple of them that had over 100,000 views. One of them, believe it or not, was a song. And I think there's another one that may have over 100,000 views. But when you look up, it's like 43 views, maybe 100 views here, maybe 300 views there, and so forth. So it goes to show you, to me, that it does not take on the urgency that needs to be taken on. And that it's still there, that if your woman steps out of line. As a matter of fact, my wife, and I give a little story about me. My wife, beautiful woman, intelligent woman, very outspoken, holds her own, does not play around. And I love all of this about her. She's a woman, spread your wings and be as independent as you possibly can be. So I don't go patrolling my wife or whatever. And if she has an opinion about something, she has an opinion about something. So one day, there was a certain person who was getting a little bit disrespectful, and my wife happened to notice it, and she told the person about it. That person is going to turn around and tell me, I better get my woman. You notice the language? Like, in other words, hey, do you know she's stepping out of her bounds by giving opinion? Do you know she's stepping out of her bounds by putting me in my place? I'm not going to speak to her. You go get your woman. As if to say, I have a leash on her and I should rein her back in. This is the kind of thinking that I'm talking about. And let us not even get into the other subject of child molestation, rapes, and all these different things that go on there. And most of all, the reason why this bothers me so much, or why another thing that bothers me, I should say, is the hypocrisy involved. One of the things that we Caribbean people like to do is point to the fact that we are a religious society. So many of us up and down the Caribbean either were socialized in Christianity, went to church, grew up in church, and we pay some sort of lip service to the Bible or to God, We will say, hey, I believe in God. I may not believe this, I may not believe that, but I believe in God. I may not go to church, but I believe in God. I may not go to this particular environment, but I believe in God. I read my Bible, I pray. We love to say this type of stuff because, again, that's another badge of honor. Hey, you believe in God, you know? So there's this belief that if we believe in God, then we're not all that bad of people. But if you had to look at our Caribbean societies with all of our churches on practically every street corner, we still suffer from so many social ills. Our region still is up there when it comes to unwanted pregnancies. I shouldn't say unwanted pregnancies, but pregnancies where it's involving people who are not married. Pregnancies involving people who are below the age of 18. We're still up there. Our murder rates in some of our countries are just ridiculously over the top, whereby we always end up on the lists on some of our countries in the Caribbean, in the top 5, in the top 10, when it comes to the murder rate per capita. We have poverty in certain areas. We have domestic violence. We have child abuse. We have rape. We have molestation, child molestation. All of these things, they're up there in numbers. Yet we have churches on every street corner, or just about. And we have a bunch of praying grandmothers and praying mothers who are praying and going to church. And it's not making a difference. So what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this? When are we going to start holding these men and women accountable for having to resort to violence to settle their issues? This scourge, this epidemic that is going on where our men are killing our women, killing our mothers, killing our sisters, killing our cousins, because, as some people say, they can't take bun, which is another way of saying they can't stand being cheated on. And the ridiculous thing about a lot of these situations, sometimes, and that's another thing that goes on in the Caribbean, men cheating is somewhat celebrated. We celebrate it in song, we joke about it, it's expected. And if the women who feel slighted because their man is out there cheating on them, and the women go and do the same exact thing, you end up hearing about the woman being killed. So this is something we need to come to grips with. We need to talk about. We need to put out there. We need to add a sense of urgency to bring this stuff to an end. We have to also look at how our parenting goes and keep in mind that we should not be repeating a cycle of violence where we're hitting. As a matter of fact, speaking of violence, I was watching a video the other day. I don't know where the video is from. There is a woman, I don't know if it's a grandmother or a mother. There's a young girl in her school uniform, couched down in a corner. And this woman, I think it's her mother because she kept saying mommy. And the woman has 2 frying pans in her hand. And the little girl is couched down. I don't know what she did. Obviously, she did something wrong in school. And I wouldn't be surprised it has something to do with boys, because she looks like at that age where this is going to start, that would start being an interest in her life. And the woman is standing above her, just clobbering her with 2 frying pans. You could hear it hitting against her bones. And you hear the little girl saying, mommy, you're hurting me, mommy, you're hurting me. And she's putting up her hands, and when she's putting up her hands, the woman is just hitting her in her hand, which could, of course, break her finger, sprain her finger, hitting her in her head, hitting her. You could just hear it hitting against her bones. 2 frying pans. And I just watched that video in anger. But this is exactly what I mean. And there are people who went through that type of stuff and grow up and say, well, hey, I turned out okay. So, okay, you didn't get pregnant. You say you turned out okay. But how does that look? And I bet you that little girl growing up is probably going to think that's okay. So if a man starts beating on her because she did something wrong, then it's okay. We can't have that. We need to also not just attack or go after domestic violence. We need to go ahead and attack what leads to that type of stuff. And things like that is what helps to lead into things like this. Our children are here, not for us to clobber and kick all around the place just because they don't listen to you or whatever. And again, a lot of us can tell you, at least my age can tell you, we grew up, our parents just gave us a couple of words. Don't bring any children inside the house. We didn't get any education. We didn't learn and know what we were and were not supposed to be. Well, I shouldn't say not supposed to do, but how to protect ourselves. How to perhaps avoid situations where we can find ourselves in relationships that we should not be in. How to look out for certain things. And when these things don't work out, or when we're young and we're going through these type of things, instead of being sat down and spoken to literally about the birds and the bees, so to speak, that conversation never happens. And whenever we go out there and we make these dumb decisions as young kids, we get clobbered because we make these decisions. And then our parents or our grandparents think that we're going to beat the knowledge into you. We're going to beat obedience into you. And many times all this did was alienate these children. And one of the things that you do realize that even if a child seemed to have walked the straight and narrow when they were living with their parents back home in the Caribbean, a lot of times you hear it come out later on in their lives. A Thanksgiving dinner. Now you're 30, now you're 35, now you're 40. You have your own children. Maybe there's a Thanksgiving dinner. Maybe there's a gathering. Maybe there's a family reunion. And a conversation comes up. And you start to hear, well, Mommy, you remember when... Because, of course, a lot of times you tend to realize that these same parents who used to clobber you treat their grandkids much better or is much easier on them. And all of a sudden you hear something like, well, Mommy, Daddy, remember when we were growing up, you did so and so. And the next thing you know, you start having this situation where there's amnesia. I don't remember doing that to you. And an argument breaks out. And then you hear all the pain that was always there just start coming out. So yes, we are dysfunctional people up and down the Caribbean. Not saying everyone, mind you. Collectively speaking, we have all this dysfunction on all of our islands. And those countries like Guyana, Suriname, French Guyana. These are things that we need to attack. These are things we need to address. So I just decided to put this video out. Hopefully there can be some discussion about it. Hopefully the right people can see this video and be inspired to go out there and start a movement, sort of do something about it. Bring out more videos. And for you women and for you men who have gone through this abuse or that's in a dangerous situation right now you could see coming and you feel you want to get out to a place where you can talk, come here. You can put it down here. Of course, I know we have men and women that are looking through phones and you don't want to call anybody. You don't want to message anyone because you figure they're going to get a hold of that information. I think you might be able to put your information out here on YouTube under an anonymous name and express how you feel. Cry out for help on here if you want to. I don't mind. Okay? All right, you guys take care. Let me end this video right now. A lot more I could have said. Of course, I've gone way over where I've wanted to go. But I really hope you found this video interesting, enlightening, and I hope it gets you thinking and hopefully get us active on dealing with this issue. You guys take care. This was your Cyril Cynic.